The red warning light blinked frantically on Sarah Mitchell's tactical display as she crouched behind a concrete barrier 3 miles from the enemy compound. Her encrypted radio crackled with static, then went completely dead. The night vision goggles she'd relied on for years flickered once and died. Even her backup communication device showed nothing but error messages. In 15 years of covert operations, she'd never experienced a complete equipment failure like this. What she didn't know yet was that someone on her own team had made sure she'd go into this mission blind, defenseless, and alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Mitchell sat in the sterile briefing room at Blackwater Industries, the private military contractor that had become her second home over the past decade. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Colonel James Hartford spread classified photographs across the metal table. The images showed a fortified compound nestled in the mountains of Eastern Europe, surrounded by high walls and guard towers that looked like something out of a Cold War thriller. "The target is Dr. Elena Kozlov," Hartford explained, his weathered face as serious as stone. "She's a former Soviet bioweapons researcher who's been selling classified viral samples to the highest bidder. Intelligence suggests she's about to close a deal with a terrorist organization that would put a weaponized strain of hemorrhagic fever in their hands." Sarah studied the photographs carefully. Guard rotations, entry points, security camera locations, she'd memorized similar layouts hundreds of times before. But something about this mission felt different. The compound was too well fortified for a simple extraction. This looked like a job that would require a full team, not a solo operative. "Why me alone?" she asked, looking up from the photos. "This looks like it needs at least a 6-person squad." Hartford's expression didn't change. Dr. Kozlov specifically requested a single female operative for the exchange. She's paranoid about large groups and refuses to meet with men. "You're our best infiltration specialist, Mitchell. If anyone can get in there and neutralize the threat, it's you." The praise should have felt good, but Sarah caught something in Hartford's tone that made her uneasy. In the corner of the room, she noticed 2 other operatives she recognized, Marcus Webb and Tony Ramirez, both members of her usual team. They were studying their own set of documents, but she could feel their eyes on her whenever she wasn't looking directly at them. "What's the extraction plan?" she asked. "You'll have full communication support from base," Hartford replied, sliding a tablet across the table. "New encrypted radio system, upgraded night vision, and a full complement of non-lethal weapons. The objective is to capture Dr. Kozlov alive and secure any biological samples she might have with her." Sarah nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. In 15 years of operations, she'd learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was wrong. The mission parameters were too clean, too simple for such a complex target. But orders were orders, and she'd never failed to complete an assignment. Over the next 2 weeks, she threw herself into preparation with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through countless dangerous operations. She studied satellite imagery until she could navigate the compound blindfolded. She memorized guard schedules, identified weak points in the security perimeter, and planned 3 different escape routes. Her equipment was checked and double-checked by the technical team, led by Marcus Webb, a man she'd worked alongside for over 5 years. Marcus had always been reliable, the kind of operative who double-checked everything and never missed a detail. When he handed her the modified radio system, his usual confident smile seemed forced. "Latest encryption technology," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Something wrong, Webb?" Sarah asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Just the usual pre-mission nerves," he replied quickly. "You know how it is." But Sarah did know how it is, and Marcus Webb had never shown pre-mission nerves in all the years she'd known him. If anything, he was the calmest operator on their team, the one who cracked jokes to lighten the mood before dangerous assignments. His nervous energy set off every alarm bell in her head. The night before the mission, Sarah was reviewing her equipment one final time when Tony Ramirez appeared in the doorway of her quarters. Tony was the team's explosives expert, a compact man with quick hands and quicker reflexes. He'd saved her life at least 3 times over the years, and she trusted him completely. "Mind if I take a look at your gear?" he asked, gesturing toward her tactical vest. "I noticed some irregularities in the power distribution during the final systems check." Sarah stepped aside, watching as Tony's experienced hands moved over her equipment with practiced efficiency. She'd seen him perform similar checks dozens of times, but tonight something felt different. His movements were too quick, too purposeful, like he was making specific modifications rather than conducting a routine inspection. "Everything look good?" she asked when he finished. "Perfect," Tony replied, but he avoided her eyes just like Marcus had. "You're all set for tomorrow." After he left, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at her equipment spread across the narrow bed. 2 of her closest teammates were acting strangely, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more dangerous than a simple extraction mission. But she'd signed up for this life, and backing down now wasn't an option. The flight to Eastern Europe was routine, a military transport that dropped her at a small airfield 50 miles from the target. From there, she traveled by motorcycle through winding mountain roads until she reached the designated observation point overlooking Dr. Kozlov's compound. The building looked exactly like the photographs, but seeing it in person made the challenge seem even more daunting. The compound sat on a rocky plateau surrounded by steep cliffs on 3 sides. The only approach was a narrow access road that wound up from the valley below, heavily monitored by security cameras and guard posts. High walls topped with razor wire enclosed the main building, and she could see at least 6 armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Getting in would be difficult enough. Getting out with a prisoner would be nearly impossible. Sarah checked her watch, 2:47 a.m. The guard rotation would change in 13 minutes, giving her a brief window when the night shift would be at their least alert. She activated her communication system, expecting to hear the familiar crackle of radio contact with base. Instead, she got nothing but static.
"Control, this is Falcon," she whispered into her microphone. "Radio check." Silence. She tried different frequencies, checked all the connections, and even swapped out the battery pack. Nothing worked. The radio system that Marcus had personally guaranteed was completely dead. A cold realization began to settle in her chest as she remembered his nervous behavior and Tony's suspicious equipment check. Her night vision goggles were the next to fail. One moment she was scanning the compound's defenses with perfect clarity, and the next she was looking through expensive green-tinted paperweights. The sophisticated optics that should have given her a tactical advantage in the darkness had been reduced to useless plastic and glass. Sarah crouched behind the rocky outcrop, her mind racing. Equipment failures happened, but not like this. Not everything at once, and not on such a critical mission. Someone had sabotaged her gear, and she had a terrible suspicion about who was responsible. The question was why. But there was no time to figure out the betrayal now. Dr. Kozlov was scheduled to meet with her terrorist contacts at dawn, just 3 hours away. If Sarah didn't complete this mission tonight, those biological weapons would disappear into the hands of people who wouldn't hesitate to use them against innocent civilians. She was alone, blind, and cut off from support, facing a heavily fortified compound with nothing but her basic sidearm and whatever improvised weapons she could scavenge along the way. The smart move would be to abort the mission and return to base for answers. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 15 years in covert operations by making the smart move when lives were on the line. Sarah moved through the darkness, using skills she'd honed long before sophisticated equipment became standard issue. Her bare eyes adjusted to the ambient starlight as she picked her way down the rocky slope toward the compound's outer perimeter. Without night vision, every shadow could hide a guard, every sound could mean discovery. The familiar weight of her tactical gear felt different now, not reassuring, but mocking. Each piece of expensive equipment strapped to her body had been deliberately compromised by people she'd trusted with her life. The first guard post sat at the base of the access road, a small concrete bunker with narrow observation windows. Through her disabled night vision scope, she'd counted 2 guards during her reconnaissance.
Now she'd have to get close enough to see them with naked eyes, close enough that they could easily spot her in return. She belly crawled through the sparse mountain vegetation, using techniques she'd learned in basic training 20 years ago. Modern operators relied heavily on technology, but Sarah had started her career in an era when soldiers still needed to know how to fight with nothing but their wits and whatever weapons they could acquire. That old-school training was about to save her life. The guard post's cigarette smell reached her before she could see the structure itself. One of the sentries was smoking near the window, the cherry of his cigarette painting a small red circle in the darkness. She waited, counting the intervals between his draws. Nervous smoker, he was taking deep drags every 15 seconds. His partner was probably inside, possibly asleep, or distracted by whatever passed for entertainment in a remote security bunker. Sarah checked her sidearm, a standard-issue Glock 19 with two 15-round magazines. 45 rounds total, assuming the sabotage hadn't extended to her ammunition. She ejected one magazine and checked the bullets by touch. They felt normal, but she wouldn't know for certain until she pulled the trigger. For now, she had to assume everything was compromised and plan accordingly. The smoking guard finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into the darkness. It landed 3 feet from Sarah's position, still glowing. She held her breath as his footsteps moved away from the window, then heard muffled conversation in what sounded like Serbian. The voices grew louder. They were arguing about something, possibly a card game or sports match. Perfect.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She sprinted across the open ground to the bunker's blind side, pressing herself against the concrete wall. The structure was old Soviet construction, built to last but not designed with modern security protocols. A ventilation grate near the foundation looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Sarah pulled out her multi-tool and began working on the rusted screws, grateful that at least this piece of equipment seemed to be functioning normally. The screws came loose after 5 minutes of careful work. Through the grate, she could see into a storage room filled with supplies and equipment. More importantly, she could see weapons. AK-47 assault rifles hung on wall mounts, along with various pistols and what looked like a crate of grenades. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been sent on a mission with sabotaged equipment, but her enemies had provided everything she needed to complete the job. Sarah squeezed through the ventilation opening, grateful for her small frame and years of flexibility training. The storage room was cramped and smelled of gun oil and stale tobacco. She moved quietly toward the weapons rack, selecting an AK-47 that looked well-maintained. The rifle felt familiar in her hands. She'd trained with Soviet weapons extensively during her early career, when American forces frequently had to use captured equipment in hostile territory. She found magazines for the rifle and loaded 3 of them, stuffing the extras into her tactical vest. A suppressor sat on a nearby shelf, designed for the AK platform. It would reduce the weapon's effectiveness at long range, but silence was more valuable than accuracy for this mission. She screwed it onto the rifle's muzzle and cycled the action, pleased to hear the smooth mechanical operation. From the main room of the bunker, she heard one of the guards answer a radio call. The conversation was brief and routine, a security check-in that revealed nothing unusual. But it reminded her that these guards were part of a larger security network. If she eliminated them, someone would eventually notice their absence. She needed to move quickly once the action started. Sarah found a small arsenal of additional equipment in the storage room. Flashbang grenades that could disorient enemies without killing them. Smoke grenades for creating concealment. Even a pair of Soviet-era night vision goggles that looked ancient but functional. She tested them briefly. The image quality was terrible compared to her sabotaged American equipment, but they worked. The green-tinted view of the storage room was clear enough for her purposes. The radio chatter from the main room had stopped. She could hear the guards settling back into their routine, one of them turning on what sounded like a small television or radio. A soccer match was playing, complete with enthusiastic commentary in Serbian.
The crowd noise would help mask any sound she might make during her approach to the main compound. Sarah approached the door between the storage room and main bunker. Through a small window, she could see both guards clearly now. One sat at a monitoring station with multiple video screens showing different areas of the compound. The other had pulled up a chair next to him and was watching the soccer match on a small portable TV. Both men had sidearms, but their rifles were leaning against the wall across the room. The guard at the monitors was the primary threat. He had direct communication with the compound security center and could alert the entire facility with the push of a button. Sarah would need to neutralize him first, then deal with his partner before either could raise an alarm. She eased the door open slowly, grateful that the hinges were well-oiled and silent. The soccer commentary covered any small sounds as she slipped into the main room. Both guards were focused on the television screen, where someone had apparently just scored a goal. Their excited cheers gave her the opening she needed. Sarah moved like a shadow across the bunker, reaching the monitoring station before either guard realized she was there. Her arm locked around the first guard's throat in a blood choke that would render him unconscious in seconds. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's struggles, but Sarah's captured AK-47 was already trained on his chest. "Don't move," I whispered in Serbian, hoping her accent wouldn't give her away as American. "Hands where I can see them." The guard's eyes went wide, but he followed her instructions. Sarah maintained the chokehold until his partner went limp, then zip-tied both men with restraints from her tactical vest. They'd wake up with headaches, but they'd live. More importantly, they wouldn't be able to warn anyone about her presence for several hours. She examined the monitoring station screens, studying the compound's interior layout for the first time. The main building was larger than the intelligence photographs had suggested, with multiple levels and what looked like an underground section. Dr. Kozlov's laboratory was probably located in the basement, away from potential aerial surveillance. The security cameras showed regular patrol patterns throughout the compound. Guards walked predictable routes every 20 minutes, covering all major access points but leaving blind spots that a skilled infiltrator could exploit. Sarah memorized the timing and began planning her approach to the main building. One screen showed the interior of what appeared to be a meeting room. 3 men in expensive suits sat around a conference table, speaking animated with someone outside the camera's view. Sarah adjusted the camera angle remotely and saw her target for the first time. Dr. Elena Kozlov was exactly as described in the intelligence briefing. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of intense focus that came from decades of scientific research. But she wasn't alone. In addition to the 3 men who were obviously the terrorist buyers, Sarah counted at least 6 heavily armed bodyguards positioned around the room. This wasn't going to be a simple extraction. It was going to be a small war. Sarah gathered additional equipment from the bunker's supplies. Extra magazines for the AK-47, a backup pistol that looked like a Makarov, and several more grenades. She found a tactical radio that appeared compatible with the compound's communication system. If she could figure out their frequencies, she might be able to monitor their security chatter and stay ahead of their response. The approach to the main compound required crossing 200 meters of open ground under the illumination of several floodlights. The guards she'd observed on the security cameras would spot her immediately if she tried a direct assault. But the bunker's equipment storage had provided her with one more crucial tool, a sniper rifle with a night scope. Sarah had qualified as a marksman with multiple weapon systems, but she'd never been a dedicated sniper. The captured rifle was a Dragunov SVD, a Soviet design, that required different techniques than the American weapons she was familiar with. She spent several minutes adjusting the scope and familiarizing herself with the rifle's action, knowing she might only get one chance to use it effectively. The compound's floodlights were her first target. If she could eliminate the illumination, I could move across the open ground under cover of darkness. But shooting out lights would definitely alert the security forces, which meant she'd need to move fast once the shooting started.
Sarah positioned herself at the bunker's window, bracing the Dragunov against the concrete sill. The first floodlight was an easy shot at this range, maybe 150 meters with no wind to speak of. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger gently, just as she'd been taught years ago. The rifle's recoil was sharper than she expected, but the shot was true. The floodlight exploded in a shower of sparks and broken glass, plunging a large section of the compound into darkness. Sarah immediately shifted to the second light, firing before the guards could react to the first explosion. Shouts erupted from the compound as the second light died. Emergency lighting kicked in, but it was much dimmer and created deep shadows that she could use for concealment. Sarah slung the Dragunov across her back and picked up the suppressed AK-47, knowing the close quarters work was about to begin. The main gate was already opening as security teams prepared to investigate the guard bunker. Sarah could see armed figures moving in the dim emergency lighting, but they were focused on the wrong threat. They expected an external attack, not a single infiltrator who was already inside their perimeter. She sprinted across the darkened ground, using the terrain and shadows to avoid detection. The captured night vision goggles gave her a crucial advantage. She could see the guards clearly while remaining invisible to them. The irony of using enemy equipment to complete an American mission wasn't lost on her, especially knowing that her own teammates had forced this situation. The compound's outer wall was 12 feet high and topped with razor wire, but Sarah had spotted a maintenance ladder during her surveillance. She reached it without being detected and began climbing, grateful for the years of physical training that allowed her to ascend quickly while carrying a full combat load. At the top of the wall, she paused to survey the compound's interior courtyard. More guards were emerging from the main building, some heading toward the bunker to investigate the disturbance, others taking defensive positions around the facility. The meeting room where she'd seen Dr. Kozlov was on the second floor of the main building, accessible through what appeared to be an external staircase. Sarah dropped silently into the courtyard and began moving toward her target, using the enemy weapons that had become her lifeline. Somewhere back at Blackwater Industries, Marcus Webb and Tony Ramirez probably thought they'd neutralized her permanently. They were about to learn that Sarah Mitchell was much harder to kill than they'd anticipated. The courtyard of the compound buzzed with controlled chaos as guards rushed to investigate the destroyed floodlights. Sarah pressed herself against the main building's concrete wall, counting at least 12 armed men spreading out in search patterns. Their tactical discipline was impressive. These weren't amateur thugs, but professional mercenaries, probably former military from various Eastern European conflicts. Through the captured night vision goggles, she watched their leader directing the search. He was a tall man with distinctive facial scars, speaking rapid Serbian into a handheld radio. Sarah adjusted the frequency on her captured communication device until she picked up their chatter. Her Serbian was rusty, but she caught enough to understand. They believed they were dealing with a sniper attack from the surrounding hills. Perfect. While they searched the wrong area, she could infiltrate the main building. Sarah moved along the building's perimeter, staying in the shadows cast by the emergency lighting. The external staircase she'd spotted from the wall was guarded by 2 sentries, but they were focused outward, watching for threats from the courtyard rather than someone already inside their security perimeter. She crept closer, the suppressed AK-47 ready in her hands. The weapon felt different from her familiar American firearms, but 15 years of combat experience had taught her to adapt quickly to any system. The Soviet engineering was crude but effective. This rifle would function reliably even after being dragged through mud and snow. The first guard stood at the bottom of the staircase, his back turned as he scanned the courtyard through an expensive-looking scope. Sarah approached silently, using a technique she'd learned from a former Spetsnaz instructor years ago. Her arm wrapped around his throat in a modified sleeper hold, while her other hand clamped over his mouth. He struggled briefly, then went limp as the blood flow to his brain was restricted. She lowered him gently to the ground and checked his equipment. The guard carried a modern assault rifle she didn't recognize, probably manufactured in one of the former Soviet republics. More importantly, he had a keycard clipped to his tactical vest, electronic access to the building's interior doors. The second guard was positioned halfway up the staircase, providing overwatch for his partner below. He sensed something wrong when his colleague stopped responding to radio checks, turning to investigate just as Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs. "Pavel," he called softly in Serbian, raising his weapon as he descended. Sarah waited until he was 3 steps from the bottom, then struck. The butt of her AK-47 connected with his temple in a precise blow that dropped him instantly.
She caught his falling body and dragged both unconscious guards into the shadows beneath the staircase where they wouldn't be discovered immediately. The captured keycard worked perfectly on the staircase's security door, granting her access to the building's second floor. Sarah found herself in a dimly lit corridor lined with offices and storage rooms. The architecture was typical Soviet institutional design, functional but oppressive, with narrow hallways and heavy doors designed to contain rather than welcome. I could hear voices from the direction of the meeting room where she'd seen Dr. Kozlov on the security cameras. The conversation was in English now, with accents that confirmed the international nature of the weapons deal taking place. Sarah moved closer, using the audio pickup feature on her captured radio to eavesdrop on the negotiations. "The viral samples you're requesting don't exist yet," Dr. Kozlov was saying in accented English. "Creating a weaponized strain of hemorrhagic fever requires months of careful cultivation. What I can provide immediately are the genetic templates and production protocols." "That's not what we agreed on," replied a voice with a Middle Eastern accent. "Our timeline is very specific. We need active samples within 2 weeks." "Impossible," Kozlov responded firmly. "Biological weapons aren't manufactured like bullets or explosives. The process is delicate, requiring specialized equipment and sterile conditions. Rush the work and you'll create nothing but expensive waste." Sarah felt a chill run through her. The intelligence briefing had suggested Dr. Kozlov was selling existing weapons, not providing blueprints for new ones. The terrorist organization wasn't just buying a single weapon, they were acquiring the knowledge to mass-produce biological agents. This mission had just become exponentially more important.
She reached the meeting room's door and peered through a small window. Dr. Kozlov sat at the head of a conference table, facing 3 men in expensive suits. The bodyguards she'd seen on the security cameras were positioned around the room's perimeter, their weapons visible but not threatening. This was a business negotiation, conducted with professional courtesy despite its deadly subject matter. Sarah counted the opposition forces methodically. 6 bodyguards, plus the 3 buyers who might or might not be armed. Dr. Kozlov appeared to be unarmed, but that didn't mean she was helpless. The briefing materials had mentioned the scientist's background in martial arts and weapons training during her Soviet military service. The door to the meeting room was reinforced steel with electronic locks. Sarah's keycard might work, but opening it would immediately alert everyone inside to her presence. She needed a different approach, something that would give her the element of surprise against superior numbers. The building's original Soviet construction included a ventilation system designed for chemical filtration during potential NBC attacks. Sarah had noticed the large air ducts running through the ceiling during her approach. If she could access the ventilation system, she might be able to enter the meeting room from above. She backtracked through the corridor until she found a maintenance access panel. The captured multi-tool made quick work of the screws, revealing a shaft large enough for her to crawl through. Sarah secured her weapons and equipment, then pulled herself into the ductwork. The journey through the ventilation system was claustrophobic and disorienting. The metal ducts amplified every sound, forcing her to move with extreme care to avoid detection. She followed the main airflow toward the meeting room, guided by the voices that grew steadily louder. A ventilation grill above the conference table provided a perfect observation point. Through the metal slats, Sarah could see the entire room laid out below her. Dr. Kozlov was showing the buyers what appeared to be laboratory photographs on a tablet computer. The images were too small for Sarah to make out details, but the buyers' expressions showed they were impressed by whatever they were seeing. These specimens were harvested from the original Soviet stockpile, Kozlov explained. Strain V47 was specifically engineered for maximum contagion and lethality. A single aerosol deployment could affect thousands of people within hours. The largest of the buyers leaned forward, his interest obvious. What about detection? Can standard medical facilities identify this agent? The incubation period is designed to mimic natural hemorrhagic fever, Kozlov replied. By the time symptoms appear, the victim has already been contagious for days.
Most hospitals won't recognize what they're dealing with until it's far too late to contain the outbreak. Sarah had heard enough. These people weren't just terrorists, they were planning genocide on a massive scale. Her mission parameters had specified capturing Dr. Kozlov alive, but the intelligence briefing hadn't anticipated the scope of what she was selling. Every minute this meeting continued, more innocent lives were at risk. She examined the ventilation grill carefully. The metal slats were held in place by small screws that could be removed quietly. Once she dropped into the room, she'd have perhaps 10 seconds of surprise before the bodyguards could react. That meant she needed to neutralize the most dangerous threats immediately, while keeping Dr. Kozlov alive. Sarah positioned herself directly above the conference table and began removing the grill screws with her multi-tool. The tiny metal pieces dropped into her palm to prevent them from falling and alerting the people below. Each screw required careful manipulation to avoid noise, but her years of precision work in hostile environments had taught her patience. The conversation below had shifted to payment arrangements. The buyers were offering $50 million for the complete genetic templates and production protocols. Dr. Kozlov was negotiating for $75 million, plus guaranteed safe passage to a non-extradition country. The casual discussion of such massive sums for tools of mass destruction made Sarah's blood boil. With the grill screws removed, Sarah prepared for her assault. The suppressed AK-47 would be her primary weapon, supplemented by the flashbang grenades she'd taken from the guard bunker. She'd need to drop through the ceiling, deploy the grenades to disorient the bodyguards, then neutralize the armed threats while avoiding harm to Dr. Kozlov. The plan was risky, relying heavily on speed and surprise to overcome superior numbers in an enclosed space. But Sarah had executed similar operations before, and the captured enemy weapons were proving surprisingly reliable. The AK-47's simple design and powerful cartridge made it ideal for close-quarters combat. She took a deep breath and dropped through the ceiling. The conference table absorbed most of her impact, but the crash of her arrival still sent papers and equipment scattering. Sarah rolled to her feet in the center of the room, the AK-47 already trained on the nearest bodyguard. Her first burst caught him center mass before he could draw his weapon, dropping him instantly. The room erupted in chaos as the remaining guards reached for their firearms. Sarah threw a flashbang grenade toward the far corner of the room, diving behind the overturned conference table as the detonation filled the space with blinding light and deafening noise. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear shouts and confused movement. The flashbang had done its job, but the effect would only last a few seconds. Sarah emerged from cover with the AK-47 ready, engaging targets as they appeared through the dissipating smoke and strobing afterimages. The second bodyguard was stumbling blindly near the room's entrance, his weapon pointed at the ceiling as he tried to regain his orientation. Sarah's controlled burst spun him around and dropped him beside his partner. 2 down, 4 to go. Dr. Kozlov had taken cover behind an overturned chair, shouting what sounded like curses in Russian. The 3 buyers were scattered around the room, one of them reaching inside his jacket for what was probably a concealed weapon. Sarah put a single round into his shoulder, spinning him away from whatever he was trying to draw. The remaining bodyguards had recovered from the flashbang and were returning fire with automatic weapons that filled the air with flying concrete chips and splintered furniture. Sarah rolled behind a heavy filing cabinet, feeling the metal vibrate as bullets struck its reinforced surface. Her tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. She was outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in an enclosed space with limited cover. The AK-47 had perhaps 20 rounds remaining, not enough for a sustained firefight against multiple opponents. She needed to end this quickly before reinforcements arrived from elsewhere in the compound.
Sarah pulled the pin from her second flashbang grenade and bounced it off the far wall into the middle of the remaining bodyguards. The detonation caught 2 of them in the open, sending them stumbling into furniture with their hands pressed to their ears. She vaulted over the filing cabinet and sprinted toward Dr. Kozlov's position, firing short bursts to keep the disoriented guards from organizing effective resistance.
The captured Makarov pistol appeared in her left hand as she closed the distance, providing additional firepower for the close-quarters engagement. Dr. Kozlov looked up as Sarah reached her position, and her eyes widened with recognition. Not recognition of Sarah specifically, but recognition of what she represented. American Special Operations, the kind of highly trained operative who could infiltrate a secure facility and eliminate an entire security team. Dr. Elena Kozlov, Sarah said in English, keeping her weapons trained on the remaining threats. You're coming with me. Dr. Elena Kozlov stared up at Sarah with calculating eyes that showed no fear, only professional assessment. American Special Forces, she said in heavily accented English. CIA, military, or one of those private contractors that your government pretends doesn't exist? Does it matter? Sarah replied, keeping the AK-47 trained on the scientist while scanning for remaining threats. 2 bodyguards were still moving in the smoke-filled room, and she could hear footsteps in the corridor outside, reinforcements responding to the gunfire. It matters to me, Kozlov said, slowly rising from behind the overturned chair. I've spent my career creating weapons for governments that claimed moral superiority while planning mass murder. The Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and now terrorists with more honest intentions. At least they don't pretend to be righteous. Sarah felt a stab of anger at the woman's casual dismissal of the lives her weapons would destroy. Those honest terrorists are planning to kill thousands of innocent people with your creations. Innocent? Kozlov laughed bitterly. There are no innocent people in this world, only those who haven't been given the opportunity to show their true nature. I learned that lesson in Chechnya, watching innocent civilians celebrate when my research facility was bombed. The philosophical debate would have to wait. Sarah could hear voices in the hallway growing closer, and the compound's security forces were undoubtedly organizing a coordinated response. She needed to extract Dr. Kozlov and escape before overwhelming numbers made the mission impossible. We're leaving, Sarah announced, grabbing Kozlov's arm. Move toward the window. The scientist resisted, her compact frame more muscular than Sarah had expected. I'm not going anywhere with you. My buyers still need to complete their transaction, and I have a reputation to maintain. Sarah pressed the AK-47's muzzle against Kozlov's ribs. Your reputation won't matter if you're dead. Move. The remaining bodyguards chose that moment to launch their counterattack. They'd used the smoke and conversation to reposition themselves, and now they opened fire from opposite sides of the room. Sarah dove sideways, pulling Dr. Kozlov with her as bullets shattered the window behind their previous position. The cover situation in the meeting room had become untenable. Furniture that had provided protection against the first assault was now destroyed, leaving only scattered debris and overturned tables. Sarah needed a new tactical approach, something that would allow her to eliminate the remaining threats while keeping her prisoner alive. She pulled another captured grenade from her vest, but this one wasn't a flashbang. The Serbian text on its surface indicated it was a standard fragmentation device, lethal to everyone in the room if detonated. Sarah pulled the pin but held the safety lever, turning it into a psychological weapon rather than an explosive one. "Cease fire, or we all die," she shouted in Serbian, holding the grenade where the bodyguards could see it. The shooting stopped immediately, as both men realized the implications of a fragmentation grenade in an enclosed space. "You're bluffing," one of the guards called back. "You won't kill yourself to stop us." "I've been on suicide missions before," Sarah replied calmly. "The difference is, this time I actually want to complete the objective." Dr. Kozlov's eyes widened as she realized Sarah might actually be willing to detonate the grenade. "You're insane. I'm worth more alive than dead." "To my government, maybe," Sarah said. "But to the families of everyone your weapons will kill, you're worth exactly nothing." The psychological pressure was working. She could hear uncertainty in the voices of the remaining bodyguards as they discussed their options in rapid Serbian. They were professional soldiers, but professionals understood risk assessment. Trading their lives for a single prisoner wasn't a rational choice. The standoff was broken by the arrival of reinforcements in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps and radio chatter indicated at least 6 additional guards approaching the meeting room. Sarah's window of opportunity was closing rapidly. She made her decision. Instead of waiting for the guards to overcome their fear of the grenade, she would use their caution against them. Sarah released the safety lever and tossed the grenade toward the far corner of the room, then immediately grabbed Dr. Kozlov and dove through the shattered window. The drop from the second floor was further than Sarah had anticipated, but years of paratrooper training had taught her how to absorb impact. She rolled with the fall, using her body to cushion Dr. Kozlov's landing while taking most of the damage herself. Pain shot through her left shoulder as they hit the concrete courtyard, but nothing felt broken. The grenade exploded above them, blowing out the remaining windows of the meeting room in a shower of glass and debris. The blast would have killed anyone still inside, eliminating the bodyguards who had threatened their escape. Sarah felt a moment of professional satisfaction. The enemy's own weapons had once again proved their effectiveness. Dr. Kozlov groaned and tried to stand, blood trickling from several small cuts where glass fragments had caught her face. "You could have killed us both with that stunt." "But I didn't," replied, hauling the scientist to her feet. "That's the difference between professionals and amateurs. Professionals calculate acceptable risks."
The compound's courtyard was no longer the relatively quiet space Sarah had crossed earlier. Floodlights had been restored, eliminating her advantage of darkness. Armed guards were emerging from multiple buildings, their voices coordinating search patterns over radio communications. The explosion in the meeting room had announced her location to every security force in the facility. Sarah assessed her tactical situation quickly. The outer wall was 200 meters away across open ground, with at least 15 armed guards between her current position and the exit. Her captured weapons were running low on ammunition, and she was now burdened with a prisoner who had no incentive to cooperate with her escape. But the mission was far from over. Sarah had operated in worse situations, and Dr. Kozlov represented intelligence that could save thousands of lives. The scientist's knowledge of biological weapons production was too valuable to abandon, regardless of the personal cost of extraction. "Where are the laboratory samples?" Sarah demanded as they moved along the base of the main building. "The actual viral cultures you've been developing." "Underground," Kozlov replied reluctantly. "Sub-level 3 of this facility, but you'll never reach them now. The security protocols automatically seal all laboratory access when the compound is under attack." Sarah considered this information. If the biological samples were in a secured underground laboratory, destroying them might be more important than extracting Dr. Kozlov herself. Dead viruses couldn't kill innocent civilians, regardless of who possessed the production knowledge. "How do we access the laboratory?" she asked. "We don't," Kozlov said flatly. "I'm the only person with authorization codes, and I'm certainly not going to help you destroy my life's work." A spotlight swept across their position, forcing Sarah to pull Dr. Kozlov into the shadows behind a utility building. The search pattern was becoming more systematic as the guards organized their response. Soon, they would have no choice but to fight their way out against overwhelming odds. Sarah's radio crackled with intercepted communications from the compound's security forces. Their commander was deploying teams to all potential exit routes while maintaining a reserve force to protect the underground laboratory. The tactical situation was deteriorating, but the radio chatter revealed something important. There was another way out of the compound that didn't involve fighting through the main gate. "Emergency helicopter landing pad," she heard one guard report. "Sealed and secured. No unauthorized access detected." A helicopter pad meant the compound had been designed for rapid evacuation of important personnel. If Dr. Kozlov was as valuable as the mission briefing suggested, there might be an aircraft on standby for exactly this type of emergency situation. "Where's the helicopter pad?" Sarah asked her prisoner. "North side of the compound," Kozlov replied automatically, then caught herself. "But there's no helicopter here tonight. The evacuation protocol wasn't activated." Sarah smiled grimly. "Then we'll just have to activate it ourselves."
She guided Dr. Kozlov along the compound's perimeter, using buildings and equipment to mask their movement from the searching guards. The captured night vision goggles continued to provide a crucial advantage, allowing her to spot threats before they could detect her position. The helicopter pad was exactly where Kozlov had indicated, a circular concrete platform surrounded by aviation fuel storage tanks and maintenance equipment. More importantly, there was indeed an aircraft on the pad, a civilian helicopter painted in neutral colors that could pass for a medical or news aircraft in most countries. "You can't fly that," Dr. Kozlov protested as they approached the helicopter. "Military pilots cross-train on multiple aircraft types. Soviet design, probably an M8 variant. I've flown similar models during training exercises." The helicopter represented their best chance of escape, but it also presented new challenges. Starting the aircraft would immediately alert every guard in the compound to their location. Sarah would need to get the engines running and achieve takeoff before the security forces could organize effective anti-aircraft fire. She shot out the helicopter's door locks with the Makarov pistol, then began the startup sequence from memory. Soviet aircraft were designed for simplicity and reliability, with straightforward controls that could be operated by minimally trained personnel in emergency situations. The turbine engines began to whine as they spooled up to operating speed. The noise was impossible to mask, and Sarah could already see guards running toward the helicopter pad with weapons raised. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they arrive in sufficient numbers to prevent takeoff. "Get in," she ordered Dr. Kozlov, but the scientist hesitated at the helicopter's door. "I won't betray my buyers," Kozlov said defiantly. "They paid in advance for information that could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. I have professional obligations." Sarah grabbed the scientist's arm and forced her into the passenger compartment. "Your professional obligations just become my problem." The helicopter's rotor blades were reaching flight speed as the first guards arrived at the landing pad's perimeter. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as they opened fire on the aircraft, bullets striking the fuselage with metallic pings that indicated small arms rather than heavy weapons. Sarah pulled pitch on the collective control, lifting the helicopter off the concrete pad just as more guards arrived with what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The RPG streaked past the aircraft, close enough that she could feel the heat wash through the cockpit. As they climbed away from the compound, Sarah realized her mission was only half complete. She had successfully extracted Dr. Kozlov using captured enemy weapons and equipment, but the biological samples remained in the underground laboratory. Thousands of lives still hung in the balance, and somewhere back at Blackwater Industries, the people who had sabotaged her equipment were probably celebrating what they thought was her death.
The helicopter gained altitude over the mountainous terrain, carrying its reluctant passenger toward an uncertain destination. Sarah had won this battle using nothing but enemy weapons and improvised tactics, but the war for those biological samples was far from over. The stolen helicopter cut through the pre-dawn darkness, its rotor blades chopping at the thin mountain air as Sarah navigated by the faint glow of valley lights below. Dr. Kozlov sat in rigid silence beside her, zip-tied to the passenger seat but alert and calculating. Every few minutes, the scientist's eyes would dart to the aircraft's controls, as if memorizing their layout for some future opportunity. Sarah's shoulder throbbed where she'd taken the impact from their window escape, but adrenaline kept the pain manageable. More concerning was the helicopter's fuel gauge, which showed less than half a tank remaining. The aircraft had enough range to reach friendly territory, but not with the detour she was planning to do. "Where are you taking me?" Dr. Kozlov finally asked, breaking the tense silence. "That depends," Sarah replied, adjusting their heading toward a set of coordinates she'd memorized from the mission briefing. "Are you going to cooperate with destroying those biological samples, or do I need to find more creative ways to motivate you?" Kozlov laughed bitterly. "You think I care about threats to my personal safety? I've survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 government coups, and a laboratory fire that killed half my research team. Death holds no fear for someone who has dedicated their life to studying it."
Sarah had expected this response. Scientists like Dr. Kozlov were driven by intellectual curiosity and professional pride rather than self-preservation. Threatening her life would be less effective than threatening her work. "I wasn't planning to kill you," Sarah said calmly. "I was planning to discredit you. Imagine what happens to your reputation when intelligence agencies around the world learn that you gave them false research data. How long do you think you'd survive once your former clients realize you've been selling them worthless information?" The threat hit its mark. Sarah saw Dr. Kozlov's hands clench involuntarily, and her breathing pattern changed. A scientist's professional reputation was everything in the illegal weapons trade. Lose that credibility, and you became a liability that former clients would eliminate quickly. "You're bluffing," Kozlov said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "You need accurate information about the biological agents to properly destroy them. Contaminate the wrong materials, and you could accidentally release airborne pathogens that would kill everyone within 50 miles. "Then I guess you'd better help me do it right," Sarah replied. The helicopter was approaching the coordinates Sarah had memorized, a remote airfield used by international aid organizations for humanitarian flights into conflict zones. The facility would have fuel, communications equipment, and most importantly, plausible deniability for what she was planning to do next. Sarah brought the helicopter down on the airfield's single runway, grateful that the Soviet aircraft's robust landing gear could handle the rough concrete surface. The facility appeared deserted except for a single maintenance building with lights visible in its windows. "Stay here," Sarah ordered Dr. Kozlov, though she knew the scientist wasn't going anywhere with her hands secured behind her back. "And remember, your survival depends on my survival." The maintenance building housed exactly what Sarah had hoped to find: aviation fuel, communications equipment, and a small arsenal of emergency supplies left by previous humanitarian missions. More importantly, the radio equipment was powerful enough to reach Blackwater Industries' command center, where she intended to have a very direct conversation with Colonel Hartford. Sarah powered up the radio and began transmitting on Blackwater's emergency frequency. "Control, this is Falcon. Mission status report required immediately." The response came back within seconds, but the voice wasn't Colonel Hartford's. "Falcon, this is Webb. We thought you were KIA. What's your status?" Marcus Webb. The man who had personally sabotaged her communications equipment was now pretending to be relieved by her survival. Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest, but she kept her voice professionally neutral. "Alive and operational, Webb. I need to speak with Hartford immediately." "Hartford's not available," Webb replied quickly. "He's in a classified briefing. I can take your report and relay it to him." "Negative. This goes directly to command authority or not at all." There was a long pause before Webb responded. "Falcon, we're showing multiple equipment failures on your mission profile. All communications went dark 6 hours ago. How did you complete the extraction without support?" Sarah smiled grimly. Webb was fishing for information about how she'd survived his sabotage, probably trying to assess whether she'd discovered the betrayal. "I improvised. Target is secure and ready for transport to designated holding facility." "Outstanding work, Falcon. Bring the package home and we'll debrief on your return." "About that," Sarah said, letting steel enter her voice, "there's been a complication. Turns out the target had biological samples at the compound that weren't mentioned in the mission briefing. Samples that could kill thousands of people if they fall into the wrong hands." Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Webb calculating the implications of this information. "What kind of samples?" Webb asked. "Weaponized hemorrhagic fever, strain V47, specifically designed for maximum contagion and lethality. The kind of thing that would make certain people very wealthy if it ended up on the black market." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Webb responded. "Falcon, you're to extract immediately with the primary target. Do not investigate any additional objectives without direct authorization." "Too late," Sarah lied smoothly. "I already secured the samples. Turns out they're quite valuable to the right buyers. I'm thinking 50 million is a fair starting price." She could hear Webb's sharp intake of breath over the radio. Falcon, you're talking about treason. Bring those samples back to base immediately. Or what? You'll sabotage my equipment again? The admission hung in the air like a detonated grenade. Sarah had just revealed that she knew about the betrayal, and Webb's next words would determine whether this confrontation remained verbal or escalated to something more dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about, Webb said carefully.
Marcus, we've worked together for 5 years. I know exactly how you think, and I know exactly how you operate. The question is why? Why sabotage a teammate? Why leave me to die in that compound? When Webb responded, his voice had changed completely. The false concern was gone, replaced by cold professionalism. Because some missions are more important than individual operators, Sarah. You were never supposed to survive this extraction. The confirmation of betrayal should have been shocking, but Sarah felt only grim satisfaction at having her suspicions confirmed. Let me guess, Dr. Kozlov was never the real target. You needed someone to eliminate the buyers and secure the biological samples, but you couldn't risk them surviving to reveal Blackwater's involvement. Very good, Webb said with grudging admiration. Though you're only seeing part of the picture. Those biological samples represent a new generation of weapons technology, the kind of technology that could shift the balance of power in multiple ongoing conflicts. Technology that Blackwater plans to sell to the highest bidder. Technology that Blackwater plans to control, Webb corrected. There's a difference between selling weapons and controlling their distribution. We're not criminals, Sarah. We're strategists. Sarah felt disgusted by Webb's rationalization. Tell that to the thousands of people who would die from those weapons. People die in conflicts anyway, Webb replied dismissively. At least this way, we can ensure that American interests are protected when it happens. The conversation was being recorded automatically by the radio equipment, providing evidence of Blackwater Industries' involvement in illegal weapons trafficking. But Sarah realized that evidence would be worthless if she didn't survive to present it to proper authorities. "Where's Tony in all this?" she asked. "Was he part of the sabotage too?" "Ramirez followed orders," Webb said simply. "Just like you should have done. Just like you still should do. Bring Dr. Kozlov and the samples back to base, and we can discuss a very generous compensation package for your cooperation. And if I refuse, then you become a rogue operative who stole classified biological weapons for personal profit. The kind of rogue operative that Blackwater has authorization to eliminate using any necessary force." Sarah understood the threat perfectly. If she returned to base, she would disappear quietly, probably listed as killed in action. If she didn't return, they would hunt her down as a traitor and eliminate her publicly, discrediting any evidence she might have gathered. "I need time to consider your offer," she said. "You have 1 hour," Webb replied. "After that, we start treating you as a hostile target." Sarah switched off the radio and returned to the helicopter, where Dr. Kozlov was watching her with intelligent eyes that had clearly overheard parts of the conversation. "Betrayed by your own people," the scientist observed. "Welcome to my world. Governments and organizations use specialists like us until we become inconvenient. Then they dispose of us. The difference is, I don't plan to go quietly," Sarah replied, starting the helicopter's engines. "Where are we going now?" Kozlov asked. "Back to that compound. You're going to help me destroy those biological samples before Blackwater can claim them." "That's suicide," Kozlov protested. "The facility will be swarming with additional security by now. They'll have brought in heavy weapons, maybe even military support from the local government. Then we'll just have to be smarter than they are," Sarah said, lifting the helicopter off the runway. "Besides, you're the one who designed their security protocols. You should know how to get around them.
Dr. Kozlov was quiet for several minutes as the helicopter climbed back toward the mountains. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of grudging respect. "You're completely insane," she said. "But you might actually be crazy enough to pull this off. What do you need to know about the laboratory's defenses?" Sarah smiled as she banked the helicopter toward the compound. Marcus Webb and Tony Ramirez thought they had eliminated a loyal soldier who would follow orders without question. Instead, they had created an enemy who understood their methods and had nothing left to lose. The mission was far from over, and this time Sarah was going to make sure that everyone who had betrayed her paid the price. Dawn was breaking over the mountain compound as Sarah brought the helicopter in low, using the terrain to mask their approach from radar detection. The facility looked dramatically different from her earlier infiltration. Additional vehicles crowded the courtyard. Temporary lighting had been erected around the perimeter, and she could see the distinctive silhouettes of heavy weapons emplacements on the main building's roof. "They've tripled the security force," Dr. Kozlov observed, studying the compound through a pair of binoculars Sarah had found in the helicopter. "Those aren't local mercenaries anymore. I count at least 30 professional soldiers, probably former Spetsnaz or equivalent special forces." Sarah nodded grimly. Webb hadn't wasted time deploying a serious recovery team to secure the biological samples. These weren't guards she could outmaneuver with stealth and surprise. They were elite soldiers who would respond to threats with overwhelming firepower. "Tell me about the laboratory's internal defenses," Sarah said, as she maneuvered the helicopter toward a landing zone 2 miles from the compound. "Biometric locks on all access doors. Automated ventilation system that can flood the entire sublevel with inert gas if contamination is detected. And a failsafe that will incinerate all biological samples if the facility's main computer detects unauthorized access."
How do we bypass the failsafe? We don't, Kozlov said matter-of-factly. The system was designed to prevent exactly what you're trying to do. The only way to access the sample safely is with my authorization codes and biometric confirmation. Sarah considered this information as she brought the helicopter down in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. The landing zone was hidden from the compound's direct observation, but it would only provide temporary concealment. Once Blackwater's forces realized she had returned, they would deploy search teams to hunt her down. "What happens if we trigger the failsafe intentionally?" she asked. Dr. Kozlov's eyes widened with understanding. The incineration system would destroy everything in the laboratory, not just the biological samples, but all research data, production protocols, and genetic templates. It would set bioweapons research back by decades. "Sounds perfect," Sarah said, shutting down the helicopter's engines. "How do we trigger it?" "Physical damage to the main computer core would activate emergency protocols," Kozlov explained. "But reaching the computer requires passing through the laboratory levels, which means exposure to any released pathogens if the containment systems fail." Sarah gathered the remaining weapons and equipment from their escape. The captured AK-47 still had 1 full magazine. The Makarov pistol had 6 rounds remaining, and she had 2 grenades left from the guard bunker raid. Not much firepower for an assault against 30 elite soldiers, but she'd worked with less. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Kozlov said as they prepared to leave the helicopter. "Those biological samples aren't just weapons, they're also the basis for developing vaccines and treatments. Destroying them completely would eliminate potential medical countermeasures." "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" Sarah asked. "I'm trying to ensure you understand the full consequences. Sometimes the cure is as important as preventing the disease." Sarah paused, considering the moral complexity of her mission. Destroying the samples would prevent their use as weapons, but it would also eliminate the possibility of developing defenses against similar biological agents. The decision required weighing certain destruction against potential protection. How long would it take to extract the vaccine data without triggering the weapon protocols? "Hours," Kozlov said immediately. "The research files are compartmentalized across multiple secure systems. We'd need time we don't have." The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance ended their debate. Sarah could see aircraft approaching from the direction of the compound, search teams deploying to locate her position. They had perhaps 15 minutes before the area would be crawling with hostile forces. "We go with the destruction option," Sarah decided. "Better to eliminate the threat completely than risk those weapons reaching terrorists." They moved through the forest toward the compound, using a route Dr. Kozlov had suggested, a maintenance access tunnel that connected to the facility's power generation systems. The tunnel was too small for regular patrols, but large enough for infiltration by a small team. "This tunnel was built during the original Soviet construction," Kozlov explained, as they crawled through the narrow concrete passage. "It was designed for maintenance access during nuclear emergencies, when surface movement might be impossible." The tunnel emerged in a utility room filled with electrical panels and water pumps. Sarah could hear the compound's increased activity through the walls: radio chatter, vehicle engines, and the systematic search patterns of professional soldiers. Webb's forces were conducting a thorough sweep, but they were focused on external approaches rather than internal infiltration routes. "Laboratory access is through the main building's basement level," Kozlov whispered, "but we'll need to pass through at least 3 security checkpoints, each with biometric scanners and armed guards." Sarah studied the building's layout on a maintenance schematic posted near the electrical panels. The laboratory levels were indeed heavily protected, but the schematic showed something Kozlov hadn't mentioned: a direct route through the building's ventilation system that bypassed most security checkpoints. "What about this ductwork?" Sarah asked, pointing to the large air circulation pipes that ran throughout the facility. "Impossible," Kozlov replied immediately. "The laboratory ventilation system includes motion sensors and automated gas dispensers. Anyone attempting to infiltrate through air ducts would be detected and neutralized within minutes." "What kind of gas?" "Depends on the threat level. Knockout gas for minor intrusions, lethal agents for serious security breaches." Sarah smiled grimly. "Good thing I brought my own breathing apparatus." She pulled out an emergency respirator she'd taken from the helicopter's survival kit. The device wasn't designed for extended use, but it would provide 30 minutes of filtered air, enough time to reach the laboratory's computer core if they moved quickly. "You're still missing the fundamental problem," Kozlov protested. "Even if we reach the computer core, destroying it will trigger lockdown protocols throughout the facility. We'll be trapped underground with no escape route." "Who says we need an escape route?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes the mission is more important than the operators." The words hung between them as Dr. Kozlov realized Sarah was prepared to sacrifice both their lives to prevent the biological weapons from falling into Blackwater's hands. The scientist's expression shifted from professional calculation to something approaching respect. "You're not like the other American operatives I've encountered," Kozlov said quietly. "Most of them prioritize their own survival over mission completion." "Most of them haven't been betrayed by their own team," Sarah replied. "They accessed the ventilation system through a maintenance panel in the utility room. The air ducts were larger than Sarah had expected, clearly designed to accommodate repair work on the complex filtration systems. But as they crawled deeper into the building, motion sensors began activating with soft electronic chirps. "Warning lights are showing on the security monitors," Kozlov whispered, checking her watch. "We have maybe 5 minutes before the automated systems activate defensive measures." The laboratory level was 3 stories below ground, accessible through a vertical shaft that dropped straight down through the building's core. Sarah could see the shaft opening ahead, with maintenance ladders providing access to the lower levels. But she could also hear the whisper of gas being released into the ventilation system, the facility's automated defenses responding to their intrusion. Sarah activated the emergency respirator and handed a second one to Dr. Kozlov. The breathing apparatus was bulky and uncomfortable, but it would keep them alive as knockout gas flooded the air ducts around them. "Move fast," Sarah ordered, beginning the descent down the vertical shaft. "We have limited air supply and unlimited opposition."
The laboratory level was a maze of sterile corridors lined with sealed chambers containing the deadliest biological agents ever created. Through reinforced windows, Sarah could see rows of culture samples in temperature-controlled environments, each one representing the potential death of thousands of people. The computer core is in the central chamber, Kozlov indicated, her voice muffled by the respirator. But look at the security deployment. Through the laboratory's observation windows, Sarah could see guards posted at every critical junction. These weren't compound security forces, they were Blackwater operatives, including familiar faces she recognized from previous missions. Webb had deployed their entire team to secure the biological samples. "Is there another way to trigger the destruction protocol?" Sarah asked. "Manual override in the main laboratory," Kozlov replied, "but it requires two-person authorization. My biometric signature plus a command code that only the facility director knows." "Where's the facility director?" "Dead," Kozlov said simply. "Killed during your assault on the meeting room. He was one of the buyers." Sarah felt the walls closing in around them. The knockout gas was seeping through her respirator's filters, causing dizziness and blurred vision. The guards outside were professional soldiers who would respond to any threat with lethal force. And even if they reached the manual override, they lacked the authorization codes needed to activate it. But Sarah Mitchell had survived 15 years of impossible missions by refusing to accept defeat. If she couldn't trigger the destruction protocol through official channels, she would create her own solution. "Tell me about the laboratory's power systems," she said. "Independent generators with backup batteries. Why?" "Because I still have 2 grenades," Sarah explained, pulling the devices from her vest. "And sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective." She led Dr. Kozlov back toward the main laboratory chamber where the biological samples were stored in their temperature-controlled environments. The preservation systems required precise electrical power to maintain the delicate conditions needed to keep the pathogens viable. Disrupt that power, and the samples would degrade rapidly into harmless organic matter. "The temperature fluctuation alone won't destroy everything," Kozlov warned. "Some of the hardier strains could survive for hours without refrigeration." "Then we'll make sure they don't get ours," replied. The laboratory's main chamber was guarded by 4 Blackwater operatives, including Tony Ramirez. Sarah felt a moment of regret seeing her former teammate in the enemy service, but the betrayal had eliminated any personal loyalty she might have felt. She pulled the pin from her first grenade and rolled it into the chamber through a maintenance access panel. The explosion shattered dozens of culture containers, releasing their contents into the laboratory's sterile environment, where the facility's own decontamination systems would neutralize them. The second grenade went into the electrical control room, destroying the main power distribution panel in a shower of sparks and severed cables. Emergency lighting activated throughout the facility, but the temperature control systems went offline immediately. Alarms began wailing throughout the compound as the laboratory's automated systems detected catastrophic containment failures. Sarah could hear the facility's decontamination protocols activating, flooding the lower levels with sterilizing agents that would destroy any surviving biological material. "It's done," Dr. Kozlov said, with mixed satisfaction and regret. 20 years of research, gone in 30 seconds. 20 years of potential genocide, Sarah corrected. Some research deserves to be lost. The facility's lockdown protocols sealed all exits from the laboratory level, trapping them underground as sterilizing agents flooded the air. But Sarah had achieved her objective. The biological weapons that could have killed thousands were being systematically destroyed by their own security systems. Through the laboratory's communication system, she heard Marcus Webb's voice calling for status reports. His carefully planned operation to secure the biological samples had been turned into a complete disaster by the operative he thought he had eliminated. "Falcon, this is Webb," his voice crackled over the intercom. "I know you can hear me. You've destroyed millions of dollars worth of strategic assets. I hope you're satisfied." Sarah activated the intercom's response function. "I'm satisfied that innocent people won't die from your strategic assets, Marcus. Consider it a resignation letter from Blackwater Industries." "You've also killed yourself," Webb replied. "Those sterilization protocols will eliminate any organic matter in the laboratory. You have maybe 10 minutes before the chemical agents reach lethal concentrations." 10 minutes is more time those biological weapons would have given their victims, Sarah said calmly. Dr. Kozlov looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You really are prepared to die for this mission."
Some things are worth dying for, Sarah replied. Preventing genocide is one of them. But as the sterilization chemicals began filling the laboratory level, Sarah spotted something that offered a slim chance of survival: an emergency evacuation tunnel that led to a surface exit beyond the compound's perimeter. The tunnel had been sealed during the lockdown, but the explosive charges she'd used to destroy the electrical systems had damaged the sealing mechanisms. "There," she pointed to the tunnel entrance, "emergency exit protocol." They fought their way through the corridor as chemical agents burned their throats and eyes, even through the respirators. The tunnel was partially flooded with sterilization fluid, but it led upward toward the surface and potential survival. Sarah emerged from the tunnel into the mountain forest as the compound's main laboratory exploded behind them, destroying the last traces of biological weapons that could have threatened innocent lives. Dr. Kozlov followed, coughing and injured, but alive. "What happens now?" the scientist asked. "Now we disappear," Sarah replied. "You, because your former clients will want you dead for losing their investment. Me, because Blackwater will never stop hunting me for destroying their operation." "And the evidence of Blackwater's involvement?" Sarah smiled, holding up a small recording device she'd activated during her radio conversation with Webb. "Already transmitted to international intelligence agencies. Marcus Webb's confession is being analyzed by people who can do something about it." The escape through the emergency tunnel had left both women exhausted and chemically burned, but alive. As they emerged from the underground passage into the pre-dawn forest, Sarah could hear the compound's destruction continuing behind them. Secondary explosions rocked the facility as ammunition stores and fuel depots caught fire from the spreading laboratory blaze. "We need to move," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Blackwater will have recovery teams here within the hour." Dr. Kozlov nodded weakly, her face streaked with chemical residue and her breathing still labored from the sterilization agents. "There's a medical clinic about 15 miles north of here, run by Doctors Without Borders. They won't ask questions about our condition." Sarah helped the scientist to her feet, surprised by how much the older woman's attitude had changed during their ordeal. The arrogant bioweapons researcher had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely shaken by how close her creations had come to mass deployment. "I need to ask you something," Sarah said as they began walking through the dense forest. "During that final conversation with the buyers, you mentioned other facilities, other laboratories with similar research." Kozlov was quiet for several minutes, picking her way carefully over fallen logs and rocky terrain. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of regret. "3 facilities," she admitted. "One in Myanmar, operated by military contractors. Another in Somalia, funded by arms dealers. The third in Kazakhstan, supposedly for defensive research, but actually developing offensive applications." Sarah felt her heart sink. Destroying one laboratory had been costly enough. Eliminating 3 more would require resources and support she no longer had. "How advanced are their programs?" "Myanmar is closest to completion," Kozlov replied. "They have samples from my original research, plus 6 months of independent development. Somalia is less advanced, but better funded. Kazakhstan has the most sophisticated equipment, but limited expertise. Which one poses the greatest immediate threat?" "Myanmar, without question. General Thought has been developing aerosol delivery systems for urban deployment. He's planning to test them on refugee populations near the Thai border." Sarah stopped walking. "Test them on refugees? You mean use innocent civilians as experimental subjects?" "It's not uncommon in biological weapons development," Kozlov said, then caught herself as she saw Sarah's expression. "I mean, it wasn't uncommon in my previous work. I've spent so many years thinking about efficiency rather than humanity that I sometimes forget these are real people's lives." The admission revealed how deeply the night's events had affected Dr. Kozlov. Sarah realized the scientist was experiencing something like a moral awakening, forced to confront the human cost of her abstract research. "We have to stop them," Sarah said simply. "We?" Kozlov asked. "I thought you said we needed to disappear, hide from Blackwater and my former clients until the heat dies down." "That was before I knew about the other facilities," Sarah replied. "If we disappear now, thousands of innocent people will die while we're hiding in comfortable exile." They reached the medical clinic as the sun was fully rising over the mountains. The facility was a cluster of white tents and prefabricated buildings marked with the distinctive red cross of international humanitarian aid. Medical staff were already busy treating patients from various regional conflicts, their dedication evident in every careful procedure. A French doctor named Philippe Dubois examined both women without asking probing questions about their injuries. He diagnosed chemical burns consistent with industrial accidents and prescribed antibiotics to prevent respiratory infections from the sterilization agents they'd inhaled. "You should rest for at least 48 hours, Dr. Dubois advised. Chemical exposure of this severity can have delayed effects on the nervous system and internal organs." But Sarah knew they didn't have 48 hours. Every minute they delayed gave General Thought more time to prepare his biological weapons test, more time for innocent refugees to become unwilling experimental subjects. "Doctor," Sarah said carefully, "what can you tell me about the situation near the Thai border? We heard reports of refugee movements that might affect our humanitarian work." Dr. Dubois' expression darkened. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly. General Thant's forces have been conducting population control operations in areas with large refugee concentrations. International observers have been denied access, but we're receiving reports of unexplained illness outbreaks." Sarah exchanged glances with Dr. Kozlov. The biological weapons testing had already begun. "How many refugees are we talking about?" Kozlov asked.
"Approximately 50,000 people are in camps along a 60-mile stretch of border," Dr. Dubois replied. "Mostly ethnic minorities fleeing military persecution. They have no political protection and limited international support." 50,000 people. Sarah tried to comprehend the scale of potential casualties if General Thant's biological weapons proved effective. It would be genocide disguised as disease outbreak, with the international community none the wiser. "We need transportation to Myanmar," Sarah told Dr. Kozlov once they were alone in their temporary quarters. "That's suicide," the scientist replied. "Even if we could somehow infiltrate General Thant's facility, we don't have weapons, equipment, or backup support. It would be a one-way mission." "Then we make it count," Sarah said grimly. "You know his facility's layout and security protocols. I know how to turn enemy assets against themselves. Together, we might be able to prevent another massacre." Dr. Kozlov studied Sarah's face carefully. "You're serious about this? Even after everything we've been through, you're willing to risk your life again for people you've never met?" "That's what the job is supposed to be about," Sarah replied. "Protecting innocent people from threats they can't fight themselves." Over the next several hours, they developed a preliminary plan using intelligence that Dr. Kozlov possessed about General Thant's operations. The Myanmar facility was smaller than the compound they'd just destroyed, but it was better defended and located in an active war zone where gunfire wouldn't attract unwanted attention. "The laboratory is built into a mountain cave system," Kozlov explained, sketching the layout on a piece of medical paper. "Natural rock walls provide protection against airstrikes, but they also limit escape routes. There's only one vehicle entrance, heavily guarded by military checkpoints." "What about the biological samples?" Sarah asked. "Same storage protocols as the last facility?" "Similar, but more primitive. General Thant doesn't have the sophisticated containment systems I designed for the European compound. His samples are stored in converted refrigeration units that rely on diesel generators for power." Sarah smiled grimly. "Diesel generators are vulnerable to sabotage." cut the power, and the samples degrade naturally without requiring complex destruction protocols. The facility does have backup generators, Kozlov warned, but they're located in a separate building, connected by underground power cables. Then we hit both simultaneously, Sarah decided. Create multiple system failures that overwhelm their ability to respond. Dr. Dubois provided them with medical supplies and basic equipment under the guise of humanitarian aid distribution. He also arranged transportation with an aid convoy heading toward the Thai border, though he clearly suspected their true intentions. "I cannot officially support what you're planning," he told Sarah privately. "But if those reports about biological weapons are true, then someone needs to act before the situation becomes catastrophic." The journey to Myanmar took 2 days through mountain roads that were frequently blocked by military checkpoints. Sarah used the travel time to study intelligence reports about General Phant's forces, while Dr. Kozlov prepared detailed technical briefings about the biological agents they would be facing. "The Myanmar strain is more aggressive than what we destroyed in Europe," Kozlov explained during one of their planning sessions. "Shorter incubation period, higher mortality rate, but also less stable. It degrades rapidly without proper storage conditions." "How rapidly?" Sarah asked. 6 to 8 hours without refrigeration," Kozlov replied. "But during that time, it remains highly infectious through airborne transmission." Sarah understood the implications. Even if they successfully destroyed the storage facilities, any samples that had already been prepared for deployment could still cause massive casualties. They would need to ensure complete destruction of all biological materials, not just the laboratory equipment. As they approached the border region, the scale of the refugee crisis became evident. Thousands of displaced families crowded makeshift camps, their temporary shelters stretching for miles along the mountain valleys. These were the people General Phant planned to use as test subjects for his biological weapons. "How can anyone justify using refugees as experimental targets?" Sarah asked, studying the camps through binoculars. "By convincing yourself that they're not really people, that they're statistical data points rather than human beings with families and dreams. It's a mindset I understand too well." The admission carried obvious pain. Sarah realized that Dr. Kozlov was seeing her own past actions reflected in General Phant's plans, and the comparison was forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about her career. "The difference is you're trying to stop it now," Sarah pointed out. "That has to count for something." "Does it?" Kozlov asked. "How many lives would I need to save to balance the ones my weapons have already taken?" Sarah didn't have an answer to that question. Redemption wasn't a mathematical equation where good deeds could cancel out past crimes. But the choice to fight against biological weapons rather than for them represented a fundamental change in the scientists' moral direction. Their convoy reached the border as intelligence reports confirmed Sarah's worst fears. General Phant's forces had begun distributing what they claimed were medical supplies to refugee camps, but the recipients were developing symptoms consistent with early-stage hemorrhagic fever. The biological weapons test had begun, disguised as humanitarian aid. Every hour they delayed would mean more innocent deaths as the engineered disease spread through the refugee population.
"We're out of time," Sarah announced, gathering their limited equipment. "Whatever we're going to do, it has to happen tonight." Dr. Kozlov nodded grimly. "Then we'd better make sure we don't fail. 50,000 people are depending on us, whether they know it or not." As darkness fell over the mountain border, Sarah Mitchell prepared for what might be her final mission. She had started this journey with sabotaged equipment and was betrayed by her own team. Now she was about to assault a military facility with nothing but basic supplies and the expertise of a former enemy who had become an unlikely ally. But sometimes the most important missions were the ones where the odds were impossible and the stakes were everything. Sarah had learned to complete objectives using enemy weapons and captured equipment. Tonight, she would discover if those same improvised tactics could prevent genocide on a massive scale.
The job was far from over, and innocent lives hung in the balance. Sarah Mitchell had never walked away from a mission when people needed protection, and she wasn't about to start now. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.